when you're smiling. Feel the magic come over you.
I'm Amy Haugland.
And I'm Alex Haugland.
And this is our 1972 Volkswagen Karmann Ghia.
Welcome to the 20th episode of Everyday to Exotic. Off we go.
Seas and mountains and fields of love above, above. And there he is, he loves to love, yes.
There's over 200 cars in the Haugland Collection.
And it just keeps growing.
Our goal is to try and drive them all.
Each episode, we'll talk about the car's history, showcase its design and features, and dive into its mechanicals.
Then we'll take it out on a drive through the beautiful roads of Oregon.
Finally, we'll rate our car to see where it stands in the Haugland Rank.
In this episode,
We'll talk about Nazi scams.
Amy has questions.
Oh my God, what did they do? And we have our most cinematic drive yet.
All this and more on our 20th episode of Everyday to Exotic.
But first, let's take a look into the car's history. Volkswagen began in 1937 in Nazi-controlled Germany with the intent of building a car for the people. Despite marketing the car to the German populace and collecting deposits from them on a savings scheme, the Volkswagen Beetle never entered full production before the outbreak of World War II, with the collected savings instead being commandeered for the war effort. The factory was used to build a VW Beetle-based military vehicle called the Coupewagen.
Following World War II, the Volkswagen factory was handed over to the British in occupied Germany, and the fate of the factory fell on the shoulders of British officer Major Ivan Hurst. After exploring options of what to do with what was a political enterprise before the war rather than an independent commercial one, Hurst painted one of the pre-war prototype cars and demonstrated it to the British Army headquarters who, in need of light transport cars, ordered 20,000 to be manufactured, marking the first serious production of the Volkswagen Beetle.
As the British were planning to end their occupation of Germany, they offered the factory to Henry Ford II, who turned it down, stating that it wasn't worth a dime. As a result, when Britain left Germany, Hurst's assistant Heinrich Nordhoff took over running Volkswagen and rebuilt the company as a functioning producer of an affordable car for the masses of war-torn Europe.
The Beetle was joined by the Type 2 commercial vehicle in various configurations in 1950, most commonly recognized today as the iconic VW bus, and then in 1955 as the economies of Europe were largely recovered from the war and demand began to rise for higher performance cars, despite their higher price. The Type 14 Karmann Ghia sports car was introduced. The project began when Luigi Segre, who ran Ghia, and Wilhelm Karmann discussed the idea without Volkswagen's involvement and decided to secretly build a prototype. Ghia acquired a Volkswagen Beetle and designed an initial prototype in 5 months and presented it to Wilhelm Karmann, who leapt at the idea of building it and presented the car to Volkswagen with a plan to enter it into production.
The Karmann Ghia initially premiered as a 2+2 coupe, with a convertible entering production in 1957. The underlying floor pan and mechanicals were shared with the economical Beetle. Over the course of its production, the Karmann Ghia had only a few slight changes. The engines continued to be upgraded in line with the Beetle, ranging from a 1.2-liter to 1.6 liters.
The Volkswagen Karmann Ghia is the most economical sports car you can buy. It's just not the most powerful.
Production continued until 1973, with over 445,000 cars produced, but a tiny fraction compared to the Beetle, whose production had already exceeded 15 million cars by that time.
Our car is a restored 1972 example, which has been retrofitted with the earlier bumpers and steering wheel. The color is original to the car, but was repainted in our ownership.
I'll never say no. Ring on my finger. That's what I want from you. Ring on my finger. Baby, I'll bow to you. Sure as you ask me, I'll never say no. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So our Karmann Ghia, or I should probably say Amy's Karmann Ghia, is a 1972 model. I actually have no problem with this car. It's her car because it's one that she really, really wanted. It's a wonderful little car.
So one of the things that attracted me to this car in the first place is its orange.
It is very orange.
I mean, orange works really well on this car. It was one of the popular colors in the 1970s. Really does a nice job of highlighting the curves and everything of this car. And I was actually really surprised how well it pops the chrome. Alex has mentioned before sort of the warm versus cool tones. And it really works, even though they're, it's not exactly a really dark color.
So this is actually the original color of this car. I think that Volkswagen called it amber. It's really more pumpkin in my opinion. When we got the car, it was orange to an extreme because the paint was all orange peel. We have had to completely strip and repaint this car, which was worth doing actually. It was underneath a really solid car. There was a little bit of work to do, but no major rust or accident damage to repair. So it was worth actually going through and basically bringing it back to what it was. Other than that, there isn't really a lot that we've had to do to this.
Most of what we've done has been for aesthetic reasons. We've retrofitted several things to this car, putting things on it from an earlier model of Karmann Ghia. This is something that we do occasionally when it's like, oh my God, what did they do? Because sometimes due to cost or regulations or things like that, some of the bits will be redesigned on cars without redesigning the whole body.
The most obvious one that you can see from the exterior of this car is the bumpers. This is a 1972 model. Originally, it shared a bumper with the Type 3 Volkswagen. It was this rectangular thing. It didn't follow the curves of the body. They just kind of stuck it on there. It met the crash safety requirements in the US. That's probably why they did it. But at the same point, it really did not fit as well as the earlier style bumpers that we ended up fitting front and back. It's not an easy fit to swap. You actually have to build brackets and things to make it all work, but it was worth it, I think, in the end for the appearance of the car.
So while we're at the front, let's talk about it. It's sort of bulbous. It kind of has this bulge that comes out in the front, and the headlights kind of are in their own little pods. I love that aesthetically. I think it looks really cool. It's different from anything else on the road.
It's a very 1950s style car in a lot of ways. There's a lot of details. The fins in the back, sort of the overall shape, the nice raised headlight pods and things like that very much are more in that 1950s aesthetic. But it is also still pretty unique for cars of that era.
There's not a lot of just decoration up here. There's chrome, but it mostly outlines important aspects of the front of the car, useful things. It is very clean. You got your VW badge on the front. These are fresh air vents that go into the passenger compartment. You will notice there's no radiator up here. This is a Volkswagen underneath.
And it's air cooled, so no coolant, no radiator, none of that. You've got big amber turn signals, highly visible. They wrap around the sides, so they cover the front and the side of the car. So kind of meet all of the safety guidelines and things that were in place in 1972.
I also love this little crease. It just goes down the center of the hood and then sort of gets smaller and fades out as it gets up toward the windshield. It's just a nice little detail. I don't know if there's any purpose for that.
In a lot of ways, probably more aesthetics. A lot of other cars of sort of this era, of design at least, would have had something like that, but it usually would have been like a raised chrome strip or something mounted to the hood, more stylistic than necessarily something molded in.
Like the Porsche 356.
Except that also serves as a handle.
Oh, that's true.
So, multifunction. Because your engine's in the back, the front is of course your trunk essentially of the car. To open it, you actually have to open the glove box, and there's a lever inside that opens the hood, which pops up and then comes up with a safety catch. It's got springs that help keep it up, and otherwise you've got a fairly shallow trunk.
Sunshine in my pocket. We live in the good.
As far as wine, there's really 0 boxes. You cannot fit a case in here. You can maybe fit a couple magnums or something, some big bottles, but it'd have to be individual bottles, and then you have to worry about them rolling around.
Yeah, and even sideways
Yes.
wouldn't work.
You could put an overnight bag in here or something. There's not a lot of room in the car here. Almost everything is probably gonna go where the back seat is. One really odd, interesting feature about the Volkswagen is this hose here attaches to your spare tire. It runs into this, which is your washer bottle, and then from there, basically allows it to squirt water up onto the windscreen using air out of your spare tire. I don't know how good an idea this really is. In all their brilliance, it's like, how do we run a washer system in a car without necessarily having any electrics or anything? Well, let's just use the air of the spare tire to push the washer fluid out and onto the windscreen. Works beautifully. The problem is, then when you need your spare tire, you've used all the air to clean your windscreen. So it's cheap, it's economical, it's kind of brilliant, and stupid at the same time. Our jack is mounted here, and then our VIN plate for the car is mounted here on the firewall. When it got repainted at some point in time, they got some overspray on it, so not the easiest to read, but all the numbers are raised, so it really doesn't matter. All of your wiring and everything is hidden behind this panel here, so if you pull it out, you can actually get to the back of the dash and all of that. Still kind of a pain. Closing, just push down and latch. So the other interesting thing, your fuel filler here, got a catch as well. That's under the dash here. You have to reach under and pull, and it flips up.
Boing.
And then it has a little flap that we flip down to protect the paint. You can open the fuel, close it up, flap goes back, and that just clips back in place.
So while we're over here, something that is also on this side of the car is this Karmann Ghia badge. There are several different styles of Karmann Ghia badge on this car. I love how this is inset in its own little indent. And then there's also Karmann, that's the Karmann badge, and then the Ghia badge right on there.
One of the interesting things on the other side of the car is the manual antenna, which is right here. The nice thing about it, you can reach out the driver's seat and potentially pull it up, which is one of those things that a lot of cars you can't do, and it can be kind of a pain when I turn on the radio and I realize, damn it, I left the antenna down, and so I still can't hear anything but static, or can't get it to tune to a station. And then it just pushes down.
I love how this line follows the curve of the fender, and then again, it sort of fades into the flat side of the car, and then comes up over the haunches. I just really like details like that. It keeps the car from being just flat, which would be much less attractive. I also love the double bar chrome that goes down the side. And I love how where the edge of the door is, the chrome strips are beveled. So they kind of dip in toward the door and then back out. It's just these nice little details. I love the door handles, especially this polished aluminum guard that keeps you from scratching up the paint with your rings or whatever. Don't know if that's original. Could be, could not be. If you know, leave us a comment.
I suspect it's aftermarket, but they came on the car when we got the car. One other thing that's aftermarket on this are the wheels. These are MP alloy wheels. They're kind of a replica of the Mini Light style wheel that you see on a lot of cars in the 1960s and things. It's a period style of wheel. The car originally wouldn't have had them. It would have been a steel wheel with metal hubcap. I think that they really looked good on the car. They came with it when we got it. It was one of the nice things that had been added by a previous owner.
So another cool detail on these cars is the pop-out back windows. Alex will demonstrate. It allows for airflow through the cabin, especially if you don't necessarily want to roll down the front windows. So one really cool thing about the back window is it's heated. You've got the little lines that tell you that it's got a defroster on it.
Which would be great if one of the contacts hadn't broken off of it. And so right now it's basically useless. We might be able to glue the contact back on, but I don't guarantee it'll ever work.
You don't want to drive this in the snow anyway.
Actually, VWs supposedly do very well in the snow. I haven't tried it, but it's because you've got the weight in the back over your rear wheels. So a lot of people actually really like them in the snow, these air-cooled VWs.
Today I learned.
I got me some sunshine in my pocket.
Other things, this being a 1972 model, it got the freaking giant taillights. The ones that have everything integrated. We've got a reverse light, our brake light, our turn signals, kind of all of it there. Just these massive, massive things. Most Karmann Ghias, the lights are significantly smaller. Earlier ones are very small.
But I love how they fill the curve of the fin. I think that looks really cool, aesthetically. We also retrofitted the bumper back here. This is, again, the earlier bumper. It's prettier than the newer one, so that's why we did it. Here you have your cover for your license plate light. I love how that has that little chrome strip and it just looks cool on the back of the car. Back here we have our Volkswagen badge. and our other style of Karmann Ghia badge, which is shiny and cool and swoopy, and I love it. This is your air intake vent for the engine. This is an air-cooled engine. Very important to have air to cool the engine.
Let air in and let air out of the engine compartment.
Yes.
Otherwise, you've got a hot engine in there basically cycling the same hot air all around it.
And speaking of the engine, I think that takes care of the exterior, so I'm gonna hand it over to Alex, and I'm going to tend to my knitting.
Okay. So, to open the engine compartment, we open the door, and there's a knob way down here that we have to pull. And that theoretically releases the engine cover. So, classic Volkswagen air-cooled motor, pretty much the same type as what was used in the Beetle. It's a horizontally posed engine with basically 2 cylinders on each side facing each other. Keeps the center of gravity really low. It's actually a really nice thing about this design in general. Keeps the weight down in the car, keeps the car pretty stable. This engine is a 1.6 liter. Puts out a reasonable amount of power, honestly, for what it is. It's a reasonably quick car, but not what I'd call really fast. It's sporty-ish. It's sporty enough to enjoy it, but not necessarily sporty enough to be winning the races. We've got our distributor here, our coils tucked up here. I didn't put that sticker on. That came on the car. The distributor here is not original. This is a really nice electronic aftermarket distributor. It's made by a company called 123. They are absolutely wonderful on a lot of these cars as far as sorting out a lot of the ignition problems that we tend to get with the older distributors. It gets rid of the points, makes the car more reliable. And I've put them on a bunch of other cars. No sponsorship, no advertising. Hell, if they get a hold of me, I'd consider it because I really like their product. But at the same point, that's not what this is about. This is about sort of what we've done and what this car is. The generator is right here. Our air filter is in the air box over on this side. And then it feeds through this hose into a carburetor here. And it's a single barrel downdraft carburetor that basically feeds the engine all of its fuel. Pretty standard Volkswagen setup for the most part. Fuel comes in through a mechanical fuel pump mounted right here. It's another thing that I find somewhat annoying about Volkswagens because the fuel tank's in the front. It can take a lot of cranking to basically get these systems to prime. Same thing with the early air-cooled Porsches. So just something to kind of be aware of. If they sit for quite a while, it usually takes quite a bit of cranking to get them to fire up. Once they fire up, they're fine. If you drive them regularly, they're pretty much fine. But in our collection, it's hard to drive everything that regularly. The other really standout thing that you'll see here is this nice black shrouded area. This basically is part of the air cooling setup, essentially with fans and everything, to help duct the heat off of the engine around to basically cool off, as well as duct the heat into the interior of the car for the heater. It does sort of a heat exchanging in order to basically bring warm air into the car as well. And so that gets you your heat. Oil dipstick down here, basically no coolant, so you don't have to worry about coolant, but oil becomes very critical as far as the cooling of these engines. It's a big part of what ends up keeping them sort of functional and alive. Generally, these engines do well in kind of all temperatures. They tend not to overheat. They tend to run reasonably well. If it's very, very hot out, you'll get pretty hot oil and it'll become a problem. But in Oregon weather, you can pretty much drive this car year-round without any issue. The biggest problem that you'll run into is in the middle of winter. It's really hard to get enough hot airflow to the windscreen and things like that to defrost things. The electric rear defroster would be great if it worked. But otherwise, most of the year you could drive this without too much issue. There's not a lot here. We've got a regulator tucked back here where it's hard to see. That is our voltage regulator for the generator. So pretty much almost all the weight in this car is at the very back. It's sort of a downside as far as handling for the most part to have that. It's one of the problems again with the Porsche 356s and also to some extent the 911s is that they have all of their weight at the back. So the early ones have a tendency to have odd issues when you start losing traction and start getting oversteer. Kind of the same issue here, but you don't have that much power. The transmission sits on the other side of the engine, basically underneath, behind the back seat, and it has 2 swing arms that connect to the wheels. So basically the wheels are mounted to the transmission, and as the suspension moves them up and down, the wheels move in an arc, essentially, on that same rotation from where it mounts to the transmission. It's one of the classic things about Volkswagens as far as the handling. It is an independent suspension, but it's a very cheap, primitive independent suspension system. It has a few flaws, especially for race cars, but not really something you're going to notice typically in a car like this just driving it around. So on the underside of the engine cover, you've got this tray here with these two tubes coming off of it. What the point of that is that if it's raining, you don't want water to come in through the nice little air ducts that you have at the top here and come all over your engine and cause like your ignition to short out or anything. So this catches all the rain, ducts it through these tubes to drains down at the bottom. And so that'll drain out and not basically end up on the engine itself. Okay. So moving forward in the car, we can now start getting into the suspension and things. As I mentioned, this is a swing arm suspension system for the rear wheels. That's essentially how it manages to get the independent suspension set up. Rear brakes, obviously drums. There are drums on all of the Ghias, pretty much all the way through production on the back. Nothing really different here. Moving forward, we've got this weird little metal cover. I think that's actually to cover up an access point for some of the suspension. I'm not absolutely positive on that, but if you know, let us know. It's kind of strange that they left it that way, but that's the only thing that makes sense to me. It's got a little nut on the back to hold it in place. Going forward, front wheel, we can see we actually have brake calipers on this. So we've got discs on the front of the car here. That is a nice upgrade, honestly, for a car from the 1970s. The very first Ghias would have still been drum braked all around. But by this point, the disc brake is a really nice upgrade. It's actually a nice performance thing for these cars. And I believe it was stock on cars by 1972. Front suspension is another sort of odd torsion bar setup that Volkswagen ended up using. That kind of has arms mounted to it that allow the suspension to move independently on the front, but it's not a traditional like A-arm suspension that you would tend to see, or double wishbone suspension. I've got a couple other cars that have used it, but not typically something that was originally Volkswagen. Pretty unusual. Steering on the car is with the steering box that basically the steering column comes down, reaches up to, and connects up to the front wheels. The transmission has a remote shift, so essentially the shift lever in the front attaches to a long rod that goes all the way to the back of the transmission. If you have to do anything with that rod, it actually has to come out through the very front of the car in order to be able to change the bushings and things on it. I had to do that after we got this car because it was very easy for it to like grind against reverse when you're trying to shift into like second and things. Replacing all those bushings, cleaned it up, tightened it up, made it actually much easier to drive. A lot less damage to the gearbox that way too. So one other thing that you have that you can see tucked down below here, and this is on both sides, is a jacking point. So the original jack has an arm that sticks into that slot, and when you jack up the car, it basically lifts by that. So that is actually where you would jack the car up. I don't like the original jacks because they have a tendency, if they tip over, to go straight in the bodywork and damage the car. Like scissor jack or something like that tends to be a better option, but in case of an emergency, I still have that option. And with that, I think we've pretty much covered the mechanicals of this car. It's pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Amy with the interior. Amy, if you would like.
Thank you, darling. Welcome to the interior. This is a 1970s car. It's mostly brown. In here, brown was a very popular interior color. It is done in the finest vinyl with like patterns sort of pressed in rather than stitched in. This was not supposed to be a super expensive car. Vinyl is great. We are fairly sure the interior has been redone at some point in the car's life, but it is period correct. The one thing that is still original is the headliner. It's perforated. This steering wheel is correct for a Karmann Ghia, but it is correct for an earlier Karmann Ghia. The previous owner put this tiny little steering wheel on here that was very annoying, especially since there's no power steering. And so whenever Alex drove it, he would hit the ends of the various levers. So we retrofitted this, which meant that we had to shorten the wiper lever, so you have to be kind of careful. However, it looks seamless, it looks great. So another interesting detail in here is this symbol on the horn boss. This is the symbol of Wolfsburg. Wolfsburg, Germany is where Volkswagen has their headquarters. The dashboard looks like we have two nice, big, normal instrument dials here. Well, this one is the speedometer. That's nice and normal. You've got your odometer in there. However, on the other side, it looks like it should be a tachometer. It's not a tachometer, it's a clock that doesn't work. It does have like some of your little alert lights, tells you you're low on oil and your lights are on and all those things. And it does have your gas gauge in it, but they could have put a tachometer in there and they chose not to. So this knob handles all of your lights. You have to have the key on, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate the lights themselves, but I can tell you what it does. So 1 click out, turns on your side lights. 2 clicks, turns on your headlights. And then you twist it to turn the intensity of the light of your instrument panels up and down. Pretty cool. This little light tells you if your brake fluid is low, hypothetically. We assume that works. This is your flashers, your emergency flashers. It emergency flashes. The radio works. The radio is original, or at least error correct. I'm pretty sure it's original. It is AM only, which if you like listening to talk radio or having 2 channels conflict with each other is fine. Otherwise, it's mostly decorative. You do have the cool little Karmann Ghia emblem on there. These get airflow into the cabin. This switch is for the rear defroster, which doesn't work. Also underneath, ashtray, because it's the 70s, so of course we have an ashtray. I don't think we have a cigarette lighter, but we do have an ashtray. One of the other aftermarket things that did not come with the Karmann Ghia in any shape or form is this center console. You will notice that it is not the same color as the vinyl or anything else really in the car. This is how we get a cup holder, because as we have discussed before, German cars do not want us to drink and drive anything. So we have a cup holder and then a couple of little pockets so you can put your change or whatever. So coming back a little bit, we have these 2 levers here on either side of the emergency brake. These adjust the heat that comes into the passenger compartment from the engine to warm up the car. There are these 2 vents that are down at the bottom near the floor. That's where that heat comes into the passenger compartment, and these 2 levers move up and down to control that. So up here we have the rear view mirror. It's pretty standard. However, a pretty cool feature is this is a light. You'll notice there's no dome light or anything like that. So this is your interior light. This little switch turns it on and off. The seat belts are very similar to the ones in our Volvo Amazon. See previous video. In order to buckle them, you push down here, which releases the catch, and then that hooks around a bar that's down here in the middle. It's just kind of almost a little hoop thing. And now I am hypothetically secured. If you want to unsecure yourself, you just push down again, unbuckle, and then lay it down over here because there's no convenient like hooky thing to put it up on. So over here you have your glove box, pretty standard. Turn, open. I love that little latch somehow. This is your frunk release inside the glove box, as previously demonstrated. And then down here, this opens your gas flap. Okay, now that I've magically swapped over to the passenger seat, we're gonna look at the back seat. Okay, so the back seat, there's really not a lot of space back here. It's barely a seat. Not a lot of padding in there. It's really not intended for you to have passengers for long distances, especially not passengers with legs. However, the back seat has a secret. Pull this latch. Ta-da! So much storage space. This gives you a huge amount more room for hauling. Not only that, but it's nicely carpeted, so you're not going to scratch anything up. And it's got this really cool ledge, so nothing's going to slide into the back of the front seats. It's fantastic. Very clever. There you go. That is a fantastic little secret. I know we talked about how this car isn't very secure and it's kind of easy to break into, but no one would ever guess that's there. So if you actually had something that you needed to keep secure in the car and you wanted to keep it not visible, that's a great place to put stuff. Shh, don't tell.
It's you I'm thinking of. Why don't you drop me a line? Come on, drop me a line.
So here we are on another fairly typical Oregon day. It's a little bit cloudy, a little sprinkly. We have some beautiful fall color going on here today. It's a perfect day to take a bright freaking orange 70s-tastic Karmann Ghia out on the road. You know, we're all about the theatrics on this show.
I cried now, baby, because I want you badly. Tell me.
So this is a car that, once you're used to it, you could probably drive every day. It's not fast. I feel like it was built to look faster than it is because it's got that fancy Italian styling happening. But it is a very reasonable, very fun vehicle. It's responsive. The brakes are really good brakes in this car. I'm not thrashing it or anything, but if I turn the wheel, the car turns. It's not like, okay, I'm gonna encourage you to go this way and maybe you'll think about it.
I mean, it's not rack and pinion, but it's actually a pretty good steering box.
Yeah, I mean, there is pretty much no play in the steering, which I appreciate very much. I do not like play in the steering wheel. It's not a big deal to go around curves. I will say that my hands are a little bit slippery on the steering wheel. Maybe I should have worn my driving gloves. Oh well. It's a very narrow steering wheel. I'm okay with it. I'm doing well. My hands are at the right place. I can get a good grip. It's fine.
I mean, this is the earlier steering wheel, technically not what came on this car. The later steering wheel just, to me, really doesn't look like it fits. A bigger wheel actually works better on this car.
And this is a pretty comfortable wheel. It accelerates okay. Has a fairly torquey motor. Not as torquey as some, but fairly torquey.
Want to talk about the gear shift?
Oh, what about the gear shift?
You don't like it?
Oh, that I don't like it. The gear shift is taking some time for me to get used to. We'll put it that way, because the linkage is so long, so sometimes it doesn't slot as neatly into the gears as some of the other cars do for me. I'm getting used to it. Getting into reverse for some reason is difficult for me, even though it's not a difficult mechanism. It's just that getting it into the place where it needs to be is a little bit difficult for me. Again, if I was driving this car every day, it wouldn't be a problem because I would be totally accustomed to its little quirks and we would learn to work together and it would be fun.
Can't you hear me, you? I'm longing for. You know I want you near me, you. I wanna love. Baby, drop me a line. Come on, come on.
One of the things I love about Oregon is that we still have this beautiful green foliage, and then we also have a lot of the pretty fall color as well. So you get those reds and golds and greens all at the same time. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful in all of its seasons. I can't wait to see the footage from this because I just know it's going to be stunning with this beautiful bright orange car going down this gray highway with the green and the cloudy sky, and all of it's going to be amazing.
So yeah, sporty as a car as this looks, I wouldn't really call it a sports car.
No.
I mean, first thing, it's missing the one key thing you need for any car that's truly a sports car. It doesn't have a tach. It has a nice giant clock that doesn't work instead. of where attack should be. The tachometer would be ideal on a car like this if you're actually going to race it, if you're actually going to drive it as a sports car. So you drive this car pretty much by ear. You hear sort of what the revs of the engine are, determine sort of what gear you want to be in based on that, and just kind of live with it otherwise. So
I have to say, not having a tachometer, though, is good training for my ear.
yes. That said, it really is not that bad of a car to drive. It's a VW Beetle with a pretty body. So
Yes.
it isn't really a sporting car. It's a economy car with a body that makes it far more pleasant to look at to some extent. I'm not saying that the Beetles are ugly, but I mean the main thing with the Ghia is it's just a pretty car.
It's Italian styling versus German styling.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's like trying to make it look like a sports car as opposed to the Beetle, where that was not the point.
Yes. There's no question I'm driving a Volkswagen. It sounds like a Volkswagen. That's part of the thing with these cars. The engine sound of these air-cooled, flat 4 cylinders is really, really distinct. You can tell it's a Volkswagen even before it comes around the corner just by the sound of the engine. Or it might be an early Porsche, but still, most likely a Volkswagen. It's able to go comfortably at speed. It's able to drive fairly nicely. It steers pretty precisely. I mean, we're on winding country roads right now, but this car is also fairly easy to drive around town. And the engine isn't bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely has power. It definitely does respond the way that I want it to. It's not fast, but it is a pleasant driving car.
I mean, the acceleration isn't amazing, but it will go.
Yeah, I agree. The gear shift is a little bit kind of odd. I mean, I rebuilt the linkage on this when we got it. Earlier, when you would shift in second, half the time it would grind against reverse. That was not acceptable.
Yeah.
So I rebuilt all of the shift linkage in this, and now it's just pretty precisely for having that really long linkage. The driving position is a little bit weird because essentially the front wheels sit right where I want my left foot to be. And so there's kind of a bump there. It's a lot like a mid-engine car. Frequently they push the driver's position forward between the front wheel wells. It's the same here with this rear-engine car. And that means that I end up sort of sitting a little bit cockeyed. I feel a little bit cramped, like I'm driving fairly bow-legged, even with the seat back quite a ways. As a taller driver, it's not as comfortable as many others, mostly for the legs. Seats are fine.
And the height of the car is fine. It feels fairly roomy in here.
We're getting a little bit of wind noise in here with the windows rolled up and things. It's not a perfect seal.
Yes, this is not a Bentley. This will get you to and from work, school, wherever you need to go, safely and efficiently.
Yeah.
But not in the lap of luxury.
Yes. These are fairly comfortable, usable cars. I mean, the advantage is it has all the reliability of a VW Beetle, which generally is pretty good. These things are kind of bulletproof, little, like, runaround cars. They last pretty well, they run pretty well. There's not much really to go wrong in them. They're air-cooled, so you don't have to deal with coolant. The downside to that is you don't necessarily get the best heater, the best defroster, things like that, but it actually works reasonably well in this car. It's a very, very drivable car. And these cars used to be everywhere. You used to see them quite often because, again, they weren't that expensive. But lately, you almost never see one on the road. They've sort of all vanished. It's a good sort of all-round, inexpensive, cheap and cheerful sports car. Quote, sports car.
Yes. Sporty,
Sporty car.
I would say.
It's just a good little car.
Great. Now we're back in the studio after another absolutely stunning drive.
Started a little bit cold, a little bit wet, but turned out to be absolutely gorgeous.
Now it's time for the Haugland Score.
Here's how it works.
Alex and I have individually rated the car in 5 categories, each with a rank of 0 to 10. Then we add our scores together to give us the final Haugland score.
After we combine our scores, the results go up on the board. For performance, I gave the car a 5. It steers beautifully. It brakes pretty well. In a lot of ways, it's a nice car to drive, but there's a couple things that really hurt it. One is it's got 60 horsepower. Porsche before this, out of basically the same size engine of almost the same design, was getting as much as 90.
Wow.
I mean, Volkswagen wasn't really building a sports car at this point, so it was a very different type of thing. They were basically sticking the same engine they're sticking in the Beetle. The other thing is, the transmission is sort of weird. I constantly felt like I was hitting a point where it's like, okay, I'm revving high in second, but then I shift to third, and now I'm lugging the engine. It just doesn't quite fill that gap very well.
And I gave it a 6 for very similar reasons. It's fine. I mean, that's where I'm at. It's fine. I feel like it could accelerate better.
Yeah.
It could have 5 gears, and that would solve that whole issue between second and third if they just had one more gear in between. It has potential. I feel like that they didn't build it up to.
Yeah, stick a Porsche 912 engine in the back and you've got a real car.
Oh, yeah. So for style, I gave it an 8. That is, I feel, where this car really shines. That is its high point. It's very distinctive. No one's going to mistake it for anything other than a Karmann Ghia, or they'll go, what is that? And I really like the orange. I think it suits it extremely, extremely well. But even just the lines on this car are gorgeous.
And I actually gave it a 6. Part of that for me is that this is a car from 1972 that looks like a car from 1956, 57. They really didn't change it much. By 72, it was pretty tired.
And to be fair, we retro-styled this one.
Yes.
So this is a very fancy 72 with some of the earlier style elements that made it a really cool-looking car. I may not be scoring it as critically as I would if this had the original bumpers on it, if this was actually a fully 1972 Karmann Ghia.
To be honest, part of my style score is the fact that we retro-styled it. If we still had the old steering wheel and the weird bumpers, I don't know that I'd be able to even give it that score.
So you're more generous because
Yes.
of that. Makes sense.
So for drivability, I gave it a 7. It drives pretty nicely. You could really use this as a regular driving car. It drives well in kind of all kinds of conditions. It has enough power. It'll go on the freeway. It drives at 65 miles an hour without too much issue. Doesn't really complain. But if I were driving this every day, I'd probably be like regretting it at certain times. At other times, it would be a fantastic car to have on the road.
So for my score for drivability, you could pretty much just put ditto. Because I also gave it a 7 for exactly the same reasons. It's not one that I would enjoy driving every day necessarily, and it has some it has some things that are impractical for daily driving.
Yes, quite a few practicalities.
That's the word. So for significance, I gave it a 6. It was significant in Volkswagen's history because it was their first sort of really sporty car. But in the grand scheme of automobile history, it really didn't even make a dent.
I gave it a 4. It is a significant car for Volkswagen. It's sort of being their third model of a car that they've come out with. It really was a shift in the style of car that they're building, but in a lot of ways it was just a pretty body on more or less a VW Beetle. They weren't cars that went out and won races. They don't have really that racing heritage. They didn't really break any molds in this in many ways. When I drove this into a restaurant, sat down and ate, and the 20-something-year-old wait staff looked out the window and said, "Oh, cool car, what is it?" And I said, "It's a Karmann Ghia." They're like, "Who makes it?" I mean, this is probably the same person who would have no problem identifying a VW Beetle of the same era or a VW bus of the same era. To me, that really indicates that the fate of the Karmann Ghia has not had much impact on the world. It's sort of fallen out of existence in some ways. So for delight, I gave it a 6. No, let's make that a 7. And the reason I'll make it a 7 is because I love the color. This is one of the only cars that I think could pull off this orange color. And that, I think, is what really makes this car in itself stand out.
I also gave it a 7 for similar reasons. The phrase that sprang into my mind was, it's not a wow, but it's a yay.
Okay.
Because people see it and go, oh, that's neat. But it's not like, whoa, that's so cool.
And I think that if it was painted the other 70s color of moss green or something along that line, the delight factor would drop pretty significantly for other people seeing the car. I think the color is a huge part of what makes this.
I agree completely. That's what attracted me to it.
Absolutely.
All right, we've done the math, and that brings us to a total of 63 points for our 1972 Volkswagen Karmann Ghia.
That puts it in 18th place, just 1 point behind our Volvo 122S.
So I think that's fair as sort of where it fits in so far with the cars that we've done. I mean, it's not a bad car. When we bought this car, it was a car you wanted and I didn't really have much interest in. In some ways, I've actually come to like it more than I expected to. It isn't that bad of a car to drive. It's just not the greatest.
Yep. Not amazing, but fun.
Absolutely.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for our 20th episode. Wow.
That wraps up essentially our second season, as we've been calling them, of Everyday to Exotic. The original plan was to do 10 episodes and see how it went. Well, now we've done 10 more. How are we doing?
We're excited to have made it this far. If you want us to keep going, please remember to like, subscribe, leave us comments about what you liked, what you didn't like, if you agree with us, if you don't agree with us.
We've made a few minor changes, a few tweaks here and there. Episodes have tended to get a little bit longer. Definitely let us know what you think. If we should keep doing this, how we should keep doing it, what should we be doing differently? Are we getting boring? Are we getting more interesting? Let us know.
I mean, we're still having a good time, so as long as you are, we'll keep going.
We've got a few cars already lined up for the start of the next season, and it should be a lot of fun. Thank you for getting us to our 20th, and we're almost 1 year into producing episodes for this show. So, thank you very, very much.
See you on the next drive. Bye.
Bye.
Just imagining Lamborghini going, what? Safety, what? You want me to ruin my beautiful car?